Hey guys, check this out. This is a 1949 Philco Model 49 1611. I just picked this up the other day. I got it for a pretty good price, I think. I paid $40 for it. The radio works on both AM and FM. There's a little bit of hum, but nothing terrible. The turntable platter turns, and on the light tone arm pickup, there is sound if I tap it. So this is actually a very restorable set. I really like the dial design of this vintage of Philco. So I think this is going to be a really cool machine to have, and I look forward to restoring it someday.
You see those two gears there? Right to the right of that capacitor, that variable capacitor. You can kind of see them as I move it a little bit. You can kind of see them, but if you look at them edge on, like so, you'll see that they aren't up against each other like they're supposed to be. See how at the bottom they're kind of separated by a couple of millimeters, and at the top they're nested together. I'm not sure why, and it's going to be real hard to get this on the camera, but if you look real close, you can see that spring there. And that spring is supposed to be attached to both of those plates in a little slot that's provided for it. And if you look real close here, you'll see that that spring is kind of come out of the slot on that on that bottom slot, and it looks like it's engaged in the slot at the top on one of the gears, and at the bottom on the other. So those gears don't come together, and that's going to be a real problem when I'm trying to drive this with the electric drive. So I've got to figure out a way to get those gears back together. Let me show you what this looks like with from this side over here. So you kind of see there, they're together there. That's how they're supposed to be. It's supposed to be like a laminated plate, you know. And you can see right there is one of those springs. And see, this spring here isn't engaged on this particular gear either. So we got a problem here because it's disengaged on that one, and presumably on this one as well. But you can't see it from here. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to get that engaged. I'm not sure, pardon the bad camera technique here, but I wanted you to see this. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to deal with that, but I'm going to have to figure out something. And I will let you know what I find. I'm going to work on this for a bit and see what I can come up with, because I do not want to disassemble. Under any circumstances, I do not want to disassemble the frame for this tuning condenser. So let me skull brain this for a little bit, and I'll get back to you. It's 7:15, and I've been fighting with this condenser for about 3 hours. I'm talking about these little half moons that I mentioned before. There they are. There's one, or there's both of them. Do you see how it's really two pieces of metal? And they kind of can shift relative to each other. It's hard to show because the camera won't focus. But take my word for it, they can shift relative to each other. Well, that little spring that you see there, right there, that little spring had come out on this one and on the one on the other side, which is right in there. Hard to see, but it's toward the bottom. Well, in any event, this is a half circle, and there's a spring. There's the other one right there. So there are two springs, and they had both come loose so that they were, both of them, almost going to fall out of the half circles. And the trouble with that is the half circles then separate, and they don't really grip the gear properly. They don't mate with the gear properly like they're supposed to. Because when this thing is not mated up with the gear and the springs are relaxed, the gear teeth on these two half circles aren't really in phase with each other. they're actually out of phase a little bit, so that when you mate this with its mating gear, when you hook it up with its mating gear, there's a little bit of pressure on the teeth, because these two half moons are fighting spring pressure, and that eliminates hysteresis, or that problem I mentioned before, where you have to tune the knob a little bit before the needle starts to move when you reverse directions while tuning. Well, this takes care of the problem. I spent about 3 hours getting those little springs back in their holes, back in their slots correctly. And I tell you what, I hope I don't have to do it again anytime soon, because that is a pain in the butt. It's that those springs at both ends have to straddle both gears. There are little tangs that stick out and stick right into the spring, and there's one on each gear for each side. And that spring has to be mated up with those little tangs. And you have to compress the spring and get it in a position before you release it for it to work, and it's a bugger. So I'm sorry about the shaky camera. I really couldn't get a good view of this from the tripod, so I just wanted to show you this little piece here. That's done. Now the easy work on the condenser can be done, and it should be no problem to get this bugger ready. I'll probably do that tomorrow night. All right, it is Sunday, November 27th. Thank you very much, and that's all for now. I have replaced the 3 grid cap wires right here. The original wires were green, so I used green cloth insulated 600 volt wire. Replaced all 3 resistors. If you can believe it, all 3 of these resistors were out of spec. These are 560K right here, and these were each right around 650K, so that's pretty significantly out of spec. I didn't like that too much. This is a 33K. Actually, oops, I made a mistake. That should have been a 330K. Now looking at it, I realize I made a mistake. Good thing I caught that now. So I'm going to go ahead and replace this one. I put a 33K in instead of a 330. I must have been half asleep. So I'll replace that one. But anyway, this 330K was sitting at around 410K, if I remember right. So that needed to be replaced. I took some desoldering braid and got as much solder as possible out of these ground straps. So that's fine. Let me see what else. I've already shown you how I've replaced or repaired this half moon gear, so that's done. I've taken some contact cleaner and cleaned everything that would come off with the contact cleaner, and I used some lacquer thinner in certain places, like around these pivots, around these axis bearing points, and I cleaned everything up with lacquer thinner and or contact cleaner, so that's good to go. And basically this thing is pretty much ready. Now, I don't know if you remember, when I first, before I fixed those half moon gears, when I would turn this capacitor, the thing made a kind of a raspy noise. Now it's just, and I haven't even lubricated this yet. Now it's smooth as anything. So when I turn that, it's very smooth. Now what I'm going to do, in all of these variable condensers or tuning capacitors, there's a ball bearing at one end and then a bushing at the other end. This ball bearing I'll lubricate with some sewing machine grease. All I do is put a little on a screwdriver like this, and basically get it on the balls, down in there real gently, get it on the balls without scratching the balls, and turn it, and then try and get as much as I can reach, and then I'll turn it back and forth, and then maybe do it again just so I can get it in there, but without going crazy. So I get those well lubricated. That will keep it turning smoothly for a long time, and it's easy to wash it out when it eventually does dry out 20 years from now, to wash it out with lacquer thinner. And then I'll take, since I can't get in the bushing with grease, I'll take a little sewing machine oil, and I'll just drop it on the shaft right near the bushing, and it'll seep into the bushing, and that'll make this real smooth, real nice and easy. And in this, on this reversing switch cam, this thing rides it in like a little bushed area here too as well, and I'll probably just use some sewing machine oil on that, so I should be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get that lubricating done. No need for you to You'll be bored to death with that. I'll show you a couple shots of each one, but basically I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and then we'll talk about it when it's all done, and I'll have this thing ready to install. It's one of those days. A couple days ago in a video, in an earlier video, I pointed out that this 33K resistor needed to be at 330K. And then I promptly forgot about it. And so I went about assembling all of this on the chassis, getting the whole thing all set up, and I never did replace this. So, you know, it's just one of those days where you have a brain collapse, and so I'm going to try and fix that today. I'll go ahead and install that resistor. As you can see, I have installed the tuning condenser with the tuning preset discs on the chassis. I installed that front bracket, and if you take a look, this there we go. It helps if you turn it the right way. The tuning drive is working fine in the manual mode anyway, and I don't expect it'll be any problem in the electric mode. So there you go. It's got a nice feel to it now. When all the pieces are together, it has a really good feel to it. A little heavier than some radios, and it's not weighted like a Zenith. It doesn't have a, you know, like a flywheel like a Zenith. So it's got a different feel altogether. But in some ways that's nice. It's got a more substantial feel than a Zenith. But anyway, I'm getting ready to organize these wires and go ahead and begin installing those harnesses that I built. And at the same time that I do that, I'll mount this motor bracket on top of the tuning assembly. And so I'll just keep moving forward. I will show you where I'm at next time. Well, as you can see, I've installed the entire tuning assembly back on the radio, minus of course the motor. But other than the motor, all the pieces are there, and it all lines up pretty well. I've done some of the wiring. I've gotten a lot of that done too. So looking down in here, you'll see that I got the ground wires attached. They're tough to make look good. I don't care what you use or how you do it. It's tough to make those look real nice. But that's all installed. And I got all the mechanism working. You see I've got nice rubber grommets installed, both on the back. There's two on the back and two on the front. So this is a really nice isolation setup, because the entire condenser part is totally isolated through rubber from the mechanical parts. It's isolated from the top bracket with that back grommet there, and then it's isolated from the chassis itself at the bottom of the condenser by the three rubber grommets that go around the sides, or I'm sorry, on the back and the front. So it's a nice arrangement. It should work out really well. It should line up very nicely. Everything's clean. Chassis is quite clean. I didn't want to clean it to the point where I removed original marks like that. They're all over this radio. This radio has a lot of ink stamps on it, and I needed to take a lot of care to make sure they stay there. And truth be told, I actually like to preserve any old markings that former owners made too. That's part of the radio's history, so I like to leave that there. So I try really hard. When I get to places like that, I may not get it quite as clean because I don't use lacquer thinner then. I use a water-soluble cleaner at that point so that I don't remove those marks. And it takes some extra effort, but it's worthwhile. There are my alignment marks for the faceplate bracket, or for the dial plate bracket. That's important. You see there are some more of those. Some former owner was marking where the tubes were, and that former owner might have just been 2 weeks ago, or it might have been, 40 years ago, and I like to keep that stuff in place. So there's a little tour of the radio, some more marks on the radio that were originally on there, and I did my best to keep them there. So I think we're getting real close. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to tilt this radio up on the side up against that transformer, and I'm going to reconnect the rest of the wiring for the RF section. I'll get that part all hooked up, and then without hooking up the motorized tuning yet, I'm going to bring the speaker onto the bench, and I'm going to hook it all up and give it a test and see if I can get some radio reception out of it, because it's a lot easier to troubleshoot without the extra weight of the motor and all that. I did some extensive work on this thing, so there's a good chance there'll be something I'll have to sort out, some troubleshooting I'll have to take care of. Not the end of the world. It's pretty common, and I have no doubts whatsoever that I'll make this radio work just fine. All right, that's the status right now, and I'll get back to work.
It's sort of like they lubricated everything in this radio with wheel bearing grease. And not just wheel bearing grease, but like 50 or 60-year-old wheel bearing grease. Because this thing has got so many places where the grease is hard as a rock and it doesn't do anything to lubricate. And it's like, this is why I like to use sewing machine grease, guys, because look at this stuff. There's no oily or liquid nature to this grease at all anymore. I can't believe I missed this, and I'm sorry for the shaky video, but I had no way to get in here with the tripod. But I can't believe I missed this. But now I've got to take this apart, this little lever here, take this apart and clean it and re-grease it. This is the same grease that was inside that tuning knob shaft, and it's nasty, hard stuff. So I'll take this apart, grease it up, put it back together, and then I think this thing is ready to lay down again and hook up to a speaker, because I've gotten all the, you see those bus wires there. There's one, there's a couple buried in there, and then the third one, they connect up to that long terminal that's coming down into the chassis from the tuning condenser. So here it is. Oops. There it is right there. That's actually a long terminal that goes up to the tuning condenser, and it connects to this little bus wire. I call it a bus wire. Up to the, in this wire, in this case here, it connects up to the wafer switch. So sometimes they connect up to a coil, sometimes they connect to a switch. Depends on which one it is. But anyway, I got those all connected. Everything's all good to go. I think that this radio is pretty darn close to do a hot test. The following recording was made on this wire recorder. It's a Webster Chicago Model 18X. What it is our Christmas celebrations from the years 1949, 1950, and 1953. I don't know the family. I do know the person that brought the recordings to me, but I don't know the people in the recordings. But I find them fascinating anyway. I love the way people talked back then. It was different than people talk now.
Hello, this is Christmas of 1949. It's the day before Christmas, and it's Father's birthday and Grandmother's birthday, and Jim's going to perform first. Okay, Jim, take it over.
Hickory dickory dock, and off and up the clock. Clock the wind, and off and down, hickory dickory dock.
Who's going to be next, ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh.
Who's going to be next? Jenny? Okay, Jerry. Then Jenny can be thinking.
Up on the housetop, reindeer's paws. Out jumped good old Santa Claus. Down to the chimney with lots of toys. All for the little ones' Christmas joys. Ho, 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 who wouldn't go? Ho, 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 who wouldn't go? Up on the housetop, click, click, click. Down to the chimney with good Saint Nick. First comes the stocking, a little mail. Oh, dear Santa, feel it well. Give her a dolly that laughs and cries. One little open and shut her eyes. Oh.
In exchange for doing the transfer from the wire to a CD, the owner of the recordings gave me this wire recorder, which was the original recorder on which these things were recorded. That was pretty cool. I've since restored it, and I use it regularly now.
This is Christmas Eve of 1950. Grandpa's now 64 years of age, and Grandma's 93 years of age.
It's actually kind of eerie to hear these voices now. It's funny because the gentleman that brought these to me, these were recordings of his father, and his brother was in the recordings as well. And his brother died very young, about 35 years ago. He wanted to get these recordings onto a CD so that he could listen to them again. He hadn't heard any of these recordings of his brother's voice since he was very young. And he was thrilled to get these. In fact, when I played them for him for the first time, he just sort of stared into the speaker, and I could see the tears coming into his eyes. It was a very powerful moment for both him and myself. It's one of the reasons I do radio restoration in the first place. This is the recorder that I put the wire recordings onto CD with. This is a Tascam CD recorder, and it's actually a really nice unit, and it does a really good job, and I use it for a lot of media transfers. It did a very nice job of doing this work.
This is the 24th of December, 1951. We're again meeting for Grandfather's birthday, and the first one to perform is going to be Rex. This is Granddad's birthday in 1952. First of all, the program's going to be Rex.
I love it when I capture the mistakes made with the recorder. Like they didn't quite cut off the music that was on the track that came just before the recording they're about to make. It gives a sense of realism to it, like I'm really there listening to him as he's making the recording. It makes it a lot of fun. The thing about wire recordings that I find the most interesting is that they don't degrade, the materials don't degrade in a wire recorder quite the same way that they do in tapes, or even vinyl for that matter. Wire recordings, if maintained properly and well cared for, should last 200 or 300 years, if not much longer. So I store all of my wire recordings in metal cans to protect them from EMF, and in plastic Ziploc baggies, double bagged, with a desiccant in each baggie with the wire recording to keep moisture down. I check them every now and then pretty routinely, and I take really good care of them. Every now and then I do get them out and play them. These aren't things that I never use. And I do have a wire break sometimes, and I fix them. I know how to tie the knots, and it can be a real hassle. But I figure these things are worthless if they're not played. And if I don't play them, who will? There aren't enough people interested. But I love that they maintain the fidelity that they were first recorded with. Not that they're high fidelity, but they don't degrade. So when you listen to it today, it's more or less how it sounded 60 years ago when the recording was first made.
24th, 1953, we're again getting it for Granddad's birthday. We gotta hurry up and catch Lawrence's sucking before he goes to sleep. He was born this last, when?
October the 9th.
We'll close this video with one more recording. And this is the mother of the gentleman who brought me the wires and the wire recorder. Her name was Mona Jackson, and she died in the early 1970s. So tell me if this doesn't send you a little chill up your spine to hear this voice. It sounds exactly like it did in the 1970s.
By John Barden. This is your announcer, Mona Jackman. We will now be presented with entertainment by We Three Girls. 7 lonely days like one lonely week. 7 lonely nights make one lonely me. Ever since the day you said that we were through. 7 lonely nights I've cried and cried for you. Oh, my darling, I'm crying. Hoo, 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 hoo.
up.
From Salt Lake City, this is Michael. That's all for now.